Thank you, Naeem. Good evening. I have three propositions. The first point I would like to mention is the necessity of strengthening the national economic, political, security systems. And I think in seeking to how to bring sustained regional dialogue, we neither need to seek foreign solution, nor seeking regional dialogue, which at the first step, which I think would be rather impossible in a broader sense. Instead, I believe that the way to regional dialogue ties and passes through strengthening national systems. And this is coming from a simple logic. And that logic is that there is a necessity of political consensus in the domestic discourses amongst the ruling elite so that they can somehow argue the benefit of regional cooperation or regional dialogue. Otherwise, this will not happen in a public sense. And I'm not talking about governments, I'm talking about the people and the state and how the elites needs to bring benefits of unity, of feeling the geopolitical stakes of a state so that they can argue in this regard. And I give you a few simple examples. For instance, the continued talk between Iran, Russia, and Turkey on the Syrian crisis is coming from this simple logic of national security benefits. Of course, Iran and Russia from the beginning were persistent on that, and Turkey later on came to the game. But the logic is very simple. The connection between domestic politics and foreign policy principles. And this, so far as it goes, I see a great deal of persistency and continuation with that, because they can somehow mobilize domestic forces to the benefit of national security and national, or even say national, political economic systems. Or I give you the example of the Iranian nuclear deal, which was the result of the great, national consensus of the necessity of talk with the U.S. so that, the sanctions can be lifted, and at the same time, strategic discrepancies between Iran and the West is resolved. But unfortunately, we see that, with this Trump issue, both are coming back. And therefore, the logic of not cooperating with the U.S. and connecting with the deterring of the U.S. threats in the region, which is very strong inside Iran. Or I give you the simple example of Saudi Arabia. Some believe that Saudi Arabia is doing this assertive policy in the region for the simple logic of institutionalizing its national political economic system by containing Iran in the region. The main reason behind that is to empowering the national system, which is understandable. And this leads me to the second point, and that second point is that the urgency of a strengthening national system is somehow connected to this regional connectivity and the urgency that is coming from the region, and geopolitical urgency that is coming from the region, which was discussed intensively yesterday. And this is because the fact that the concept of war, crisis, stability, and even economic growth amongst the states and nations are somehow changing, and we discussed this transformative characteristics of states as the result of war and dealing with the crisis. And I think that the nations of the region are somehow focusing to the fact that they need more responsibility from their states, and the nations are becoming more inward-looking or counting on its own sources of power. And this can be generalized in a way in the concept of regional connectivity, and I can give you a lot of examples: the relations between Iran and Iraq, the relations between Iran and Turkey, which is a great model, the dynamic relations and growing relations between Iran and Russia, which is started by security equations, and it is now extending to economic, tourism, social, cooperation in a way. I would like to say that how much, nations are becoming more regionalized, the logic that was mentioned just now, that they are connecting with the state's concept of regionalizations. And if we look at the last decade, we see that a great deal of regionalization is happening in the region. And the states are being forced to accept this concept amongst the nations. In other words, the nations and people are forcing the state to accept these kind of regionalization, or the concept of regional connectivity and regional integration, which has a great deal of geographical, logic, and at the same time, economic growth that is being counted on, national economies. And I think this is important to be, taken into consideration. And this leads me to my last point. By combining this bilateral and multilateral, cooperation, which is the theme of this panel, I came to this concept of multilateral cooperation, which of course I think is an ideal, concept. But again, I think there should be a great deal of economic integration at the bilateral and trilateral levels, and at the same time, multilateral cooperations that is coming from this logic of strategic constraints of the states to deal with, regional crisis alone. I see that, out of a lot of challenges that came from regional crisis, there was an opportunity, and that opportunity is that the states are realizing they cannot go ahead, alone, and they need to put it in a kind of political solutions in a multilateral concept. So I came to this concept of multilateral order, which is of course ideal. And I get back to my first point. My first point is that the way to sustain regional talks and dialogues passes through empowering the national state system. And I think this is important, that every actor play its own role, its own geopolitical role to bring stability. And as a result of this accumulation of a state's stability, that everyone plays its own role, then we see a kind of domestic stability, which is good to be generalized in the broader region. And I think that if the foreign countries would like to play a very meaningful role, it is better they support the strengthening of national systems, because at the end of the day, they will connect and will bring this, national systems kind of networks that can be at the benefit of the region. And my last point in conclusion, last but not least, I think a stronger and a stabilized state will better go to regional cooperation. And I think it was just yesterday that Joseph Bahut mentioned about this dilemma of decentralization of the state in Syria, which requires a stronger state to somehow connect with this concept and brings order so that we can further go towards regional dialogue, as was exemplified by Joseph. And I stop now. Thank you.